Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here before you. So I guess what I've been asked to do is kind of talk about the various things that I've done and what led me from one thing to the next, because it isn't completely intuitive how somebody would get from internet payments to rockets. And so I'll tell you that story, and then I think there's some questions that I'll be answering that have been submitted. So I was born in South Africa, and left there when I was 17. I always wanted to come to the United States. I'd visited here as a kid when I was, I guess, about 10 or something, and I read a lot of comic books, and they always seemed to be set in the United States. So it seemed like where cool things happen. And I felt in South Africa, actually, that if you wanted to be at the cutting edge and if you wanted to be at a place where great things were possible, that there was no better country in the world. And I think that's still true today. And I don't mean to suggest complacency, because one can lose that, but I do think it is true, even still. So I had to go through a somewhat circuitous route because although my grandfather was American, a lot of people don't know that, from Minnesota, and which is not far from here, I think. Close. My great-grandfather was also from Minnesota, and in fact, I was named after my great-grandfather. So I'm kind of the opposite of Barack Obama. I'm from Africa, named after an American. But my mom was born in Canada, so I didn't have U.S. citizenship. So initially I was in Canada for a few years, and then came down to the U.S., went to the University of Pennsylvania, studied physics and then business at Wharton, and decided that I actually wanted to try to invent technologies related to electric cars. There were actually three things that I thought were really, that I thought would most affect the future of humanity when I was in college. And those three were the internet, sustainable energy, and making life multiplanetary. But I thought about those things in the abstract. It wasn't as though I thought that I would actually be involved in all three of those things. But so it goes. And at the time, I actually thought probably the best opportunity might be in electric cars. And so I actually went out to California originally with the intent of doing a PhD at Stanford on high energy density storage devices for electric cars, particularly ultracapacitors. And I got out there, and then during that summer, I wrote some internet software, and this was in '95, and I thought, well, I can either spend several years doing a PhD on ultracapacitors and maybe find out that success was not one of the possible outcomes, because that's, unfortunately how it can sometimes go. Or I can try to start an internet company and see how that goes. And I did hedge my bets. I actually asked for deferment at Stanford, so I figured, in fact, I talked to my professor and said I'd like to defer for about maybe 3 to 6 months, and I'm pretty sure I'll be back because companies usually fail, and that's how it goes. And he said, well, it's probably the last conversation that we'll have. That was the last conversation we had. Although I should point out, a lot of people think like I must be huge on being entrepreneurial. I actually tried to get a job at Netscape, if people can remember, probably can remember that company. I sent in my resume, didn't get a reply. And I tried hanging out in the lobby, but I was too shy to talk to anyone. So I figured, well, either I'll start an internet company or I won't do anything on the internet. So that's where I wrote some software and started my first internet company called Zip2. And that turned out well, actually. So we ended up building software that helped bring the media companies online, particularly the newspapers. They weren't always online. We weren't a consumer brand, but we helped with the New York Times and Knight Ridder and Hearst and a number of others who were investors and customers. So we sold that to Compaq at the time, and then with the funds from that, started a company called X.com, which merged with a company called Confinity to create PayPal. So, initially with X.com, in the early days of the idea, I was just trying to figure out, well, where is there an opportunity an industry that perhaps hasn't had a lot of innovation applied to it, where the internet could make a lot of sense. And it seemed to me that, well, money is essentially just an entry in a database, and there wasn't really. It was quite difficult to pay for things online. If you weren't a credit card processor, like on eBay, people would mail checks to one another. We created this system which actually had an integrated set of financial services and had this feature which enabled you to transfer funds just by entering an email address. And when we demonstrated the system, nobody cared about the financial services, but people loved the email payments thing, which was the easiest to implement. So we focused on that. And now this is approximately December of '99. Things were kind of crazy in December of '99. Like the NASDAQ was 4,000 or something like that. We debuted the site kind of like around that time, and then by the end of January, we had about 100,000 customers. And we had 5 people in customer service. That's a lot of anger. Actually, I'll tell a little short anecdote about how we solved that problem, because I've never done customer service before. So we sat around basically thinking we're really screwed. What are we going to do? So we tried 2 things. We hired an outsourced call center company, which did work for AT&T and American Express, and we thought, well, those guys are real experts. They're really going to know how to do this. But they were taking a bit of time to get going. So then my director of communications said, well, she's got this sister in Omaha she's a housewife. She doesn't have anything to do, and she's got some friends, and maybe they could take the easy questions. And I thought, well, what do we got to lose? Sure. They were awesome. They kicked the ass of the professional call center company. So I sent my director of communications out to Omaha and said, you're now the head of the call center. You need to hire 100 people in 30 days. And actually, that's where the PayPal call center is to this day. So yeah, it worked out really well. So then, I think things were quite turbulent in 2000, particularly on the internet. But I'd like to thank Madison Dearborn for investing in March of 2000. And I understand it ended up being a pretty good return. It did. And we made it through that really tough period. And then in February of 2002, we I took the company public, and then we received an offer in about mid-2002 from eBay to purchase the company, and we sold the company for a decent amount of money. So, in fact, it allowed me to do some of the other things that are relatively high capital endeavors. Rockets and cars. They take a lot of cash. So I started SpaceX first, and I'll go a little bit backtrack a little, because initially I was not going to start a rocket company. The thought I had was that we needed to reinvigorate interest in space and in exploration, and I thought, well, if we could just do something that would get people excited about space exploration, then NASA would get more money, and then we could continue on and send people to Mars and have a base on the moon, and just, we can keep going in space. And so the thought I had was this thing called Mars Oasis, which was to send a small greenhouse with seeds and dehydrated nutrient gel. You'd land the greenhouse and you'd hydrate the gel, and the plants would grow. And the public tends to be, people in general tend to respond to precedents and superlatives. So this would be the furthest that life's ever traveled, the first life on another planet. And so I thought, well, that would get people really excited. And so I started learning more and more about space and all of the elements. And although I have a physics degree, which is helpful, I didn't know anything about rockets or spacecraft or anything. So, but I learned more and more, and I was able to get the cost of the spacecraft and communications and so forth down to a reasonable number, sort of in the sort of several $1 million range, which is very low for something like that. But I had trouble with the rockets, and the lowest cost U.S. rocket was a Boeing Delta II, and that was $65 million. And I figured that we'd probably make some mistakes, so we needed to do 2 of these in case one went wrong, and because otherwise it would be really, anticlimactic. And maybe not have the desired effect. And I didn't have enough money for that. Because I wasn't expecting this would make any return. So I thought, well, where can you get lower cost rockets? And, Russia, as it turns out, has a lot of rockets. And, with the disarmament and the various SALT treaty, SALT talks and so forth, they had to destroy a bunch of rockets under the treaties, and well, instead of destroying them, you could sell a few to us. So I went to Russia 3 times. That was to buy an ICBM. Felt normal at the time. So yeah, this was in late 2001 and 2002. It was definitely, and I was, I guess, about 30, and the Russians were like, there's some crazy American here that wants to buy the biggest ICBM in the Russian fleet. But then I said, well, I got money. They said, well, he may be crazy, but he has money. And they're happy to talk to me. So after the 3rd trip to Russia, I was like, wow, I got really tired of going to Russia. And I started to learn more and more about it, and I thought, well, maybe, how hard is it to make a rocket? It's like, what does it really take? And so I gathered together a group of engineers, and we had a series of sessions during the weekends, because most of them were working. And I just wanted to understand what made rockets expensive, or what goes into a rocket. You learn a lot, I think, often more by talking to people than by reading books, but I mean, both are good sources. And it just seemed to me like there wasn't really anything fundamentally preventing us from having much more advanced rockets that lowered the cost of access to space. And I also decided that I was wrong about my initial assumption about there being insufficient will. I think there's actually a great deal of will to explore in the United States, but particularly the United States, which is a nation of explorers. It's really fundamental to the American psyche. There's no shortage of will, but people need to believe that there is a way. And so I thought, okay, well, we need to work on the way. And so I started SpaceX in 2002 with the proceeds from PayPal, or a large part of the proceeds from PayPal. And the initial idea was, well, let's make the smallest useful orbital rocket, which would be able to deliver about 1,000 pounds to orbit, which is, there are some satellites that fit into that category. And that was the Falcon 1. And we needed to develop the whole rocket, including the engines, the stages, the guidance control system, electronics, and the launch site, because to the degree that we used legacy components, then we inherited the legacy cost structure and limitations. So we essentially had to do the whole thing from scratch. And this compounded the problem. And of course, then I'm there, and I actually tried to hire someone to be the chief designer, but the ones who were really good wouldn't join, and the ones who weren't really good, well, that wouldn't have been helpful. So I ended up being the chief designer, and well, we got to orbit on the 4th time. It's cut to the happy part. We did technically get to space on the 2nd and 3rd flights, just not all the way to orbital velocity. And a lot of people don't quite appreciate the difference between getting to space and getting to orbit. But to get to the edge of space, you only need about a Mach 3 terminal velocity. To get to orbit, you need a Mach 25. And the energy required scales with the square. So you need 9 units of energy to do a suborbital flight. You need 625 units of energy to get to orbit. And we did almost get to orbit on Flight 2. And that, I won't drill into the technical details, but yeah, that was unfortunate. The video is quite sad. As you see it spiraling out of, technically it was spiraling in control. So anyway, the third launch failure was in roughly in mid-2008, and then going into the end of 2008. Well, I was not a good environment for raising capital, and I'd run out of money. So fortunately, the 4th flight worked in late 2008, and then I think it was December 23rd, approximately, NASA announced that they were giving us a $1.6 billion contract to resupply the space station. So that was like Merry Christmas. Yeah. But if the 4th flight had not worked, that would have been it for SpaceX. Thank you, fate. And in parallel with that story, there is the story of Tesla. I don't have enough time to tell all the stories of these things, but initially with Tesla, I didn't think it would be necessary to do something like Tesla, but I was disappointed that General Motors had recalled the EV1, and I don't know if people have seen Who Killed the Electric Car, but it was sort of a sad story. At the time, people thought electric cars would be, they would be ugly and slow and and low range, kind of like a golf cart. And so we needed to show that was not true. And so we created Tesla, developed the Tesla Roadster, and that helped get the ball rolling. And we unveiled it in 2007. And in fact, that was what got General Motors to do the EV1 and Nissan to do the Leaf and a number of other programs. And initially, I tried to not be CEO of Tesla as well. A lot of people think I'm CEO of two companies because I want to be. That's not the case. But going into 2008 again, to essentially commit all of my capital between SpaceX and Tesla, I had zero cash. In fact, I ultimately had to borrow money from friends to pay the rent. So I had to run both companies, or it would not have. Well, our success odds would have been much lower. And I'd like to thank Antonio Gracias for being a key investor and not just investor but strategic partner through that period. I don't think we would have made it without his help. So thank you. So that, we had to raise a round for Tesla at the same time. And at the end of 2008, let me tell you, if you tell people you're a startup car company and you need money, and General Motors and Chrysler are about to go bankrupt, that is a tough story. But we managed to raise the money, really all from internal investors, and I'm grateful to them all for doing that. And then with Tesla, we're able to convince Daimler to become to be a partner of ours, and we provided the battery pack and charger for the electric Smart. And after that was successful for about a year, then they became an investor, and they were also key to saving Tesla. And then we went public in I guess 2 years ago. Yeah, so we went public 2 years ago, and it's gone pretty well. And in a few months, we'll be coming out with the Model S. So it'll go into production. That car over there. And with the Model S, our goal is to show that a car that is of a comparable price to other premium sedans is actually arguably a better product. It's got a range of 300 miles. It could do 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds. It's, I think it's not bad looking. And yeah, and it can charge fast. It's an awesome car. I gotta do a bit of car sales. Anyway, so I'll switch back to SpaceX for a minute, and then take questions, or address the questions. So jumping to where SpaceX is now, we were able to get Falcon 1 to orbit, then we got our Falcon 9 big rocket to orbit. Fortunately, that worked on the first time. And then we were able to launch our Dragon spacecraft and brought that to orbit and returned it to Earth. And we have an upcoming flight, which is to the space station. This will be the first time we attempt to dock with the space station. There's a lot that could go wrong. Hopefully it doesn't. So it'll certainly be a nerve-wracking time, but that launch is in the next 3 or 4 weeks. And then in about maybe 3 years or so, we should be launching astronauts. And then the long-term goal of SpaceX is to develop the technology necessary to extend life to Mars and make life multiplanetary. And I think I can see a path towards making that happen. And yeah, that's SpaceX. So yeah.
So thank you, Elon. So there's so many places I could start. We got solar power, internet, space rockets. electric cars, a serial entrepreneur. So let's start with Tesla. In the development of the electric car, by the way, these questions are submitted by our members, so if they seem particularly stupid, I did not do these. So in the development of the electric car, why did you skip over the hybrid model and other alternative fuels?
Sure. We actually initially did look at doing a plug-in hybrid for the sedan, and after really thinking about it for a while, I felt that we could, if we split the baby effectively, we could either we would not make a good product. I felt if you focus on an electric car or you focus on a gasoline car, you can make a great gasoline car or a great electric car. But if you split it, you end up having a really compromised vehicle. So I felt that it was also somewhat of a transitional phase, and the plug-in hybrid felt to me more like sort of an amphibian, and you want to sort of transition all the way to being either land or ocean. That was, I mean, that could turn out to be wrong, but that's how I felt. And I forgot to mention that there is actually a video, a SpaceX video, which I think might be interesting for people to see. I don't know if we can play that.
That we can, or can we?
I don't know if it's handy, but all right, there you go.
Let's look at the economic. All right.
This is a simulation, by the way. So what the simulation is showing is what we aim to get to with the next generation of rocket technology. The ultimate goal of rocket, I mean, the long sought after goal with rockets is to make one that is fully reusable, like other modes of transport. You can imagine that if you had a jet that was not reusable, very few people would fly. Or if you had a car that was not reusable, very few people would drive. We have to have rocket technology that is rapidly and completely reusable. And that's what we hope to develop next at SpaceX. The cost of the fuel or propellant is only about 0.3% of the cost of the flight, much as it is for an airplane. So you can obviously, there's a 2 order of magnitude potential for improvement if you can make a fully and rapidly reusable rocket.
I'm going to get to SpaceX in a minute, but I understand that the Model S will debut in July, but it's sold out through March 2013. So what do you project for the electric car space, and will we all be driving electric cars?
Yeah, what I think will occur is that all modes of transport will be fully electric, with the ironic exception of rockets. Although I think it's possible for rockets to be renewable, because you can, with the water, CO2, and electricity, and something like a ruthenium catalyst, you can create methane and oxygen, which is actually pretty good rocket fuel.
So yesterday, GM reported that a battery blew up in a test. Just tell us 2 things. Have you had problems with batteries with Tesla? And where's battery technology going? A tremendous amount of money has been invested in companies that are developing battery technology.
Sure. We've never had a battery fire or explosion in any car at Tesla, and we've now had we've got, I don't know, quite a few cars on the road. We've got cars on the road now in 33 countries. And particularly since our first car was a roadster, a sports car, they've driven it some pretty crazy ways. And if you can actually Google Tesla accident if you're curious, and there are some real doozies out there. There was one where a guy was parked in front of a Volkswagen Touareg, which is kind of a big SUV, at a light, and got rear-ended by, I think, a Prius at about 50 miles an hour. It was quite a hard impact, and got shoved under the Touareg like a wedge, flipped the Touareg into the air. It landed on the Tesla, so there's this picture of this Volkswagen SUV sitting on top of a Tesla with a Prius in the butt. And both the driver and passenger walked away without injuries. So no battery fire. So it's been, I mean, I say that now, and of course, I'm testing my luck by saying that, but so far it's been really good.
Well, that's a heartwarming story, but how about where battery technology is taking us?
Absolutely. So I got a million of those.
Yeah.
So battery technology has been improving approximately, 8% a year, or maybe 10% a year, depending upon how you count it in terms of cost and energy density. So if you look at, say, the battery pack in the Roadster versus the Model S, there's about a 50% increase in energy density, and the cost is about half. So cost per kilowatt hour is about half. So that's a pretty, decent improvement over the course of, let's call it 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I think we'll see continued improvement in the future. We've got a pretty good roadmap. I can certainly see 30, 40% improvement without any miracles. So that's kind of where I see things going.
Okay, thanks. So SpaceX represents an interesting intersection of public and private funding, and it could be viewed as contrarian to your libertarian views.
My libertine views.
Why is public funding philosophically correct in this instance? And do you view the government as your customer or your partner?
Well, government is, in the case of Tesla, Tesla does have a loan from the Department of Energy. Now, it is, in terms of total capital raised and all that, I guess it's sort of roughly around a third of the capital is coming from the DOE loan. I think we could have gotten things done without the DOE loan, but that was certainly a helpful catalyst. In fact, a lot of people think Tesla was saved by the DOE loan, but this is not the case. Daimler saved, at the time that people thought we were saved by the DOE, we were actually saved by Daimler. So we certainly have someone to thank, but and it starts with a D, but it's Daimler. And then about a year after that, we started receiving some DOE funding. But I think we kind of had to do that because if GM and Chrysler and many others are receiving government funding and we don't seek a low-cost source of capital, then, well, that would be pretty dumb. So we kind of had to do it. And I think on balance, it's a good program, that particular program. Which is a separate program from Solyndra, in case anybody's wondering. Honestly, if I had $1 for every time somebody mentioned Solyndra, I wouldn't need an IPO. But then in general, it's important to bear in mind that the government is going to be a third of almost anyone's customer base. Like if you make pens or ham or whatever, anything, since the government is about a third of the economy, there will be about a third of your customers on average.
So along those same lines, what do you think of the U.S. government's retrenchment in research and development, particularly in regards to the space program?
Well, NASA's budget has been relatively flat in space, so it's not so much. I mean, it's a small reduction, but it's not a huge reduction in government expenditures on the NASA front. However, it seems as though things have gotten more and more expensive to do things in space. And I think that's partly because NASA has not had great options as far as who to work with. the main NASA contractors have tended to increase their costs over time, and they've tended to merge and consolidate, so there were fewer of them. So if you're in NASA's position and you don't have a lot of horses in your stable to choose from, then things are going to get more expensive over time. And so what I think SpaceX has been able to do is to be quite helpful to NASA in giving them options that are lower cost and enable them to achieve more for a given dollar. A lot of people think SpaceX is somehow competitive with NASA, but actually NASA is our biggest customer. There are about a third of our launches are with NASA.
Do you think the Russians have announced some pretty aggressive plans for intergalactic exploration and whatnot? Do you think that'll act as a spur, put pressure on the U.S. to re-energize its space program earlier than they presently plan?
Well, I don't think the Russians are likely to be a serious competitor in space. Unfortunately, the Russians have not invested in they've invested very little in new space technology since the fall of the Soviet Union. The rockets that existed 20 years ago are very similar to the rockets that exist now. So I don't think much is going to occur there. I think China, on the other hand, could be a significant competitor. They are investing a great deal in their space program, and they are very much set on exceeding the United States in space exploration. So I think it's really just going to come down to the United States and China.
Now, you're a businessman and you're trying to change the world in many of the things you do. Do you stop to consider what is more important, creating profit or having a positive effect on society?
Well, I don't think being profitable and creating a positive effect are necessarily mutually exclusive. In fact, I think they're usually coincident. But I mean, there are times when they are not aligned, but those times are more unusual than usual. And there are cases such as where you have the classic tragedy of the commons issue, which anyone who's taken Economics 101 is aware of, where you have a public good that is consumed and it's not priced correctly. I think this is the case with the CO2 capacity of the oceans and atmosphere. There is some CO2 percentage which is going to result in calamitous events on Earth. It's not completely clear what that percentage is, but you can certainly, I think you would get wide agreement that at a certain percentage it's going to be quite bad. Unfortunately, there's no price placed on this. And so you have classic tragedy of the commons occurring. You see this also in fishing stocks in international waters, where since no one owns the fishing stock in international waters, they will fish a certain area to extinction, that's all well and good. That's the fish, but in this case, it's us. So I think we really need to pay attention to that particular issue.
Thanks. You're right. We did invest in PayPal, and I called my person that made the decision. It was a 35% return.
Great.
So I thank you for that.
You're welcome.
PayPal was a pioneer in e-commerce, but its other importance was launching the careers of several entrepreneurs who went on to start it or play key roles in companies such as YouTube, LinkedIn, Yelp. Can you describe the culture that existed at PayPal that helped inspire these entrepreneurs? And what other companies do you see as similar in encouraging young people to go out and innovate and start up companies?
So I think part of what's caused there to be so many companies to have started from PayPal was that you had two pretty strong talent bases from X.com and Confinity that merged. So you had kind of a double talent base, and then it was sold for pretty significant amount of money, and so suddenly you had a lot of talent and a lot of liquidity, and that's what really gave rise to a lot of these companies. And there was also a good mixture of people, because there were some people like Roloff Botha, who went to Sequoia and was a venture capitalist, and Peter Thiel, who's sort of quite a smart investor. And then you also had people that were sort of more entrepreneurial and tech, strong with technology. So it was sort of a good mix of talents and expertise. And they'd all been had the Silicon Valley operating system loaded into their heads during the PayPal era, and had seen both the sort of the high times as well as the very low times. So that they were they were veterans of a sort in entrepreneurial experience. I think those are probably the key ingredients that resulted in those companies.
Do you, I mean, you're young, and you say many times you didn't intend to be CEO, but you became CEO. Do you consciously try to create a culture of innovation? Is it more collaborative or competitive, would you say?
I think it's more collaborative than competitive. Yeah. I certainly try. In fact, I'm certainly pushing for innovation all the time. So I'm trying as hard as I can to push people to try new and different things. Whenever you try something new, there's a probability that it will succeed. It's never certain. In fact, it's arguably quite uncertain. So there has to be a culture where failure is fine, provided that people thought it through and kind of had some good assessment of the risks ahead of time. When you try to be innovative, most things you try will not succeed. But then occasionally they do, so you really have to foster a risk, what I would call a risk-rational environment. Yeah.
Let me go back to SpaceX for a minute. For those of you who are cheating on your hand device, you probably saw that the North Koreans had a little accident with their rocket today, and apparently didn't make it into orbit. And you did that 3 times. And
four times.
Four times.
Yeah.
So you had one more, and you were going to be out of money.
Yeah,
correct?
That's correct.
So that had to be like watching your 8-year-old on the foul line with the game tied. I mean, what was it like watching that fourth? That was it the 5th launch or the 4th?
Sorry, the 4th launch was the one that got to orbit. Yeah.
So what was that like? What was that day like? What was that time when they blasted off? Was it like the longest time of your life?
It did. It takes 9 minutes to get to orbit, and that was a long 9 minutes. I felt terrible. and at the end of it, I mean, I was literally white-knuckled, just the whole time. And at the end of it, I didn't even feel elation. I just felt relief.
Yeah. So Chicago is striving to be a hub of innovation, and we've had some successes. We have a great universities and research labs, progressive companies, and a talented workforce. How can Chicago be more successful in creating hosting innovative companies? Would you have any advice for us?
Well, I think Chicago is a great city, and lots of awesome companies are here. Yeah. So it's.
Sounds like there are only 12 people in Chicago here.
I love visiting Chicago. I guess it depends on what type of company. You mean sort of high-tech companies, then I think you need to have venture capital, particularly in the sort of seed round and the A round area, because that's very sparse in most parts of the country outside of Silicon Valley and to a lesser degree the Boston area. You need to have a bit of an ecosystem where the fundamentals of the business, in terms of being able to lease space and get legal advice and accounting help and all that, where there are some people that are willing to support a company that that's just an idea. You have that in Silicon Valley, so that's what I mean by this sort of ecosystem. And then at least for technology, you need to have critical mass of technical talent. So to do whatever you can to attract the key engineers. And you have some great universities here, so I think those are a good nexus for creating technology companies.
We have a lot of young members, and we have a lot of young guests here tonight that are in their early stages in their business careers. Some of them are entrepreneurs or want to be. Do you have some advice? Maybe you've started 5 companies yourself, all successfully. Do you have some advice?
Well, I'd say certainly make sure you have a good pain tolerance. There's a friend of mine who has a phrase for starting a company, is that it's like eating glass and staring into the abyss. If that sounds appealing, you know. And those who have started companies know what I mean. It's pretty hard, and you have to be prepared to live on next to nothing. I mean, when I started my first company, I had a few $1,000s. I couldn't. I started actually with my brother, who's here in the audience somewhere. And he came down from Canada, and we started this company, and we literally had a tiny amount of money. So we could either get an apartment or we could get an office, and the office was cheaper. So we got the office, and then we had sort of these futons that would be couches by day, and we'd have meetings, and then they'd turn into beds at night, and we'd shower at the YMCA down the road. That's low burn rate, basically. So if you're starting a company, really focus on having a low burn rate. And I think try to get a useful product demonstration as soon as possible, even if it's just completely jury-rigged, so people can get an idea of what your product's like or service or whatever the case may be. That they need to really feel it. Everything looks great on PowerPoint. Everything works on PowerPoint. But if you can actually get a sample or a demo or something, that really makes a difference. In fact, that was key to us getting the initial Daimler contract. Daimler was really, the idea of them buying technology for an American car company was the furthest thing from their minds. It had a negative experience with Chrysler, and that was not what they wanted to do. But we created a complete working electric smart. And demonstrated it for them, and that's really what got them interested. So,
is there any leader or innovator or entrepreneur that you truly admire and had an influence on you, or any mentor?
Well, there's really a long list. I love reading biographies. So I think they've all had some measure of influence. I recently read, obviously the Steve Jobs biography is great, and read a number of books, both the autobiography and a number of books on Ben Franklin. I think he's pretty awesome. I like Edison. Obviously, I like Tesla. And then I like a lot of the scientists as well. Newton and Einstein and a number of others. But I've read, many different things. It's difficult to say that there's only one particular one. But I do strongly recommend reading biographies and autobiographies. I think those are really fascinating.
What's your leadership style? What would people, if you weren't in the room, say about your leadership? And what do you look for in people that you surround yourself with?
Well, I try to find people that are really smart and driven, and that have a strong feedback loop. It's really important to seek out feedback, particularly negative feedback. In fact, I think one of the best things that someone can give you is constructive negative feedback. But it kind of sucks to hear it, so you have to you kind of have to make yourself hear it. So.
I agree with that statement. That's why I don't ask for it.
Right.
So what's the next big thing for you. You've done 5 companies. What do you see as a problem you're ready to solve?
Well, I'm definitely going to be working on SpaceX and Tesla for a long time, and then this Solar City, which is the solar power, and although I'm not there on a day-to-day basis, just provide some strategic guidance, and the main credit for that goes to Lyndon and Peter Rive. But I think I'm kind of strung out right now, honestly.
Did you move out of that office, or you got an apartment?
Yeah, we did.
Good.
Yeah.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah, it turned out it leaked, that office. Fortunately, it doesn't rain that much in California. Yeah.
So one of the most amazing things you've done, you've started 5 companies, your investors have never lost money, but I don't know anybody else that has twin boys and triplet boys.
Right.
How the hell did you do that?
Science.
And then a follow-up question. There 2 of them are 8, 3 of them are 5, right?
That's correct.
And so you're running 2 companies, and you're involved with another that I know of. So how do you get balance in your life? What do you do to balance all this stuff? I have a Labrador Retriever. That's about all I handle.
Well, my week kind of goes like this. I have SpaceX on Monday, Tesla on Tuesday and Wednesday, then Thursday I'm back at SpaceX. I have half of Friday at SpaceX, half of Friday at Tesla, because the Tesla design studio is adjacent to the rocket factory. And then weekends are spent with my kids. So that's kind of how it works out.
Well, that's pretty good. So I know you're very philanthropic. Why don't you take a few minutes to tell us some of the things that you are involved in, and I think they're important, and
Sure.
there's a chance to make a pitch, and there's a lot of rich guys out there.
Right. I tend to support a bunch of things in the environment, and I think education is extremely important. That's probably the best investment for the long term. And I support a lot of educational initiatives, particularly in science, and for underprivileged kids here and in other countries. We're just building a high school in Haiti, in a place that's never had a high school. I think supporting education and environmental causes, healthcare. There's so many good causes, really, but I think probably the toughest problem for this century is going to be sustainable energy, because that is just such a, the energy production of energy and consumption of energy is such a gigantic industry, and there's so much inertia, and we do have such a strong dependency on hydrocarbons. That's going to be a tough one, and so yeah.
And water, people say, well, access to clean water. Have you looked at that as a place that you'd be interested in?
Water is, I view water as primarily an energy problem, in that if you have affordable energy, you can run a desalination plant or water purifier, that kind of thing. And then that sort of takes us back to sustainable energy. But I do, there are localized water problems in many parts of the world, certainly. Haiti is a good example, where they've had the biggest cholera epidemic in the world. I think 400,000 or 500,000 people have been affected, which is 5% of the population, because they don't have clean water.
So one final lesson, and I don't know if this is true, but have you said that you plan to retire on Mars? And if that's true, when will that be? And how the hell will you get there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I could build some big rockets.
So you're going to get yourself there.
Yeah, I think the next generation of rockets after the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, basically after the Falcon line, will be capable of sending people to Mars. It's not clear how long it'll take us to develop that, but I think best case 10 years, worst case 20 years. So sometime in the probably 12 to 15-year period is when I think we're likely to go to Mars. But people have accused me of optimism.
Elon, thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
It was really good.